with us today. Again, please keep your microphones muted throughout the presentation. We have three wonderful presenters for a very interesting session today. Once each presenter has fully presented their presentation, then we will open up the floor for questions. You can either raise your hand and we'll call on you during the question Q&A part of this presentation, or you can put it in the chat and I'll keep monitoring that as well. So let us begin. My name is Professor Benitez-Curry and I work at the School of Media and Public Affairs, and we have some very interesting presentations tonight. The theme is called Visual Politics, Cartoons, Deepfakes, and the Artist's Wife. We are going to start our presentation today with Mr. Arvin Sarsazi. He has an interesting presentation entitled Bella, Chagall, and the Legacy of Invisible Wives. Arvin, you have the floor.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay, so as you mentioned, the title of my presentation is Bella Chagall and the Legacy of Invisible Wives. This presentation is based on a research paper I did last semester for the UW 1020. It was taught by Professor Pollack, and I just want to talk about the methods and the process of writing this paper before. So I'm a CS major, I'm a computer science major, and I had no idea about art history before picking this course. I just saw that it fit my schedule and that it has an interesting topic. But as it started, as we did catalog entries and me not knowing anything, it just organically developed what I'm interested in. Professor Pollack helped me research some stuff about Bella Chagall, and that just continued. I did mainly my research in the GW collection based on books and also the books in the National Gallery. A little bit of online research. I used Research Rabbit mostly for that, and that's how I came up with this paper. So, well, I hope you guys like it. Okay, so sorry. Okay, so who is Marc Chagall? Marc Chagall is a brilliant artist. He has over thousands of art pieces through many different mediums: paintings, oil on canvas, stained glasses, etchings, and many others. Also, the subjects of his works are...
Can you make the slideshow bigger? You haven't started the slideshow. It's just a tiny thing on the screen, unless I'm the only one seeing that. Is that true? No.
I have it full screen. Is that not...
Is that true?
The way it is?
For us, it's not a slideshow.
Yeah,
it's not presenting.
It's not presenting, yeah.
It's not moving, Arvin. Try hitting slideshow and make your page bigger, because we're just seeing we see the slides all in a row, but they're not moving and we see it small. So if you expand your screen,
Okay, give me a second.
Yes.
So stop the share screen. Do you guys have it?
Almost. Right.
I don't see it yet. Okay, so we see it.
And now I could do...
Click slideshow.
I did. Do you guys see the full picture now?
We see the picture, but it's not full frame.
Very tiny. You have to be on slide 1 and you're on slide 2. So if you go to slide 1 and then go up to the cursor where it says slideshow, click on that, and then it should say view slideshow.
Yeah, I have.
Yeah, Arvin, I think that it might be, I think when you go to click share your screen, you have to click the slideshow window, not the Google slide window. Yeah, I think Leah commented that. I think that's correct. Thank you, Leah.
Could you help me again?
Yeah, so if you go to click share screen within the Zoom window,
Yeah.
you should have, like it should pop up.
Why not?
Yeah.
There you go. Perfect.
Excellent. Thank you so
Okay.
much. Okay, we're good.
Is it working now?
Yes.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. Yeah, sorry about that. Okay, so who is Marc Chagall? So he has many works of art through many different mediums. Also, the themes of his work is very diverse. He has works on Judaism, love, death, exile, human spirit, everything. And I'm sure even if you haven't heard of him, you've seen some of his works. This is the picture on the left is the peace window in the UN headquarters, which is one of Marc Chagall's most famous works. And on the right, to show the influence he had in the 20th century, it's in a movie, Notting Hill, pop culture classic. And part of the plot of the movie was a painting of Marc Chagall. But this is not the topic of this presentation. This presentation is actually about his wife, Bella Rosenfeld Chagall. So here you can see the abstract of my paper, but in short, the question that sparked this research is, why is it that most wives of famous male artists are forgotten and lost in history? Wives like Hortense Fouquet, married to Paul Cézanne, or Amélie Matisse, married to Henri Matisse, despite having crucial roles as models, homemakers, or administrators, are mostly erased. Bella Chagall is a rare exception, however, and we want to delve into the question of why is it that she has such a prominent role in art history and among the scholars, completely different than the others. Well, to answer that, we're going to look at her life and accomplishments. So Bella grew up surrounded by faith, education, and tradition. Her parents were wealthy, they owned a jewelry business, and even though Jewish education focused mostly on the boys, Bella received a rare multilingual education. She studied Hebrew, Russian, and Yiddish. After school, she moved to Moscow to study literature and philosophy, even writing theater reviews, which was very bold for a Jewish woman at that time. Bella basically represented a new generation of educated Jewish women who found a way to balance tradition and modern intellectual life. Her most important literary work is Burning Lights. It was written in Yiddish in the late 1930s and published after her death in 1946. Burning Lights is a lyrical memoir of her childhood in Wiedebeck, filled with Jewish holidays, rituals, and memories of family life. By writing in Yiddish, Bella wasn't just recording her past. She was basically preserving a vanishing world and asserting her independence, her independent artistic voice, let's say. And interestingly, Marc Chagall actually illustrated the book himself, but despite the fact that he was most famous, this wasn't an attempt to overshadow her work, but as a way of elevating her book. Burning Light to this day remains a testimony to faith and female authorship. Bella and Marc Chagall met in 1909 for the first time through mutual friends, and their connection was immediate. They got engaged by the end of the year, and even though their families came from different wards, Marc's father was a laborer, but Bella's family was wealthy. That didn't stop them. And especially at the beginning, it was very tough because Marc Chagall had to move to France to continue her continue his path. And that meant they have to spend 5 years apart. But despite the years apart, their connection only grew stronger. This is one of the works that Marc Chagall did in France of Bella. And you can see how their faces are, we can say, are blurry. Maybe Marc didn't completely remember how Bella looked, but you can see like their connection is, how strong their connection is. They're basically floating together. They're interconnected in soul. And that's how most of the works of Bella are. So Bella appears in Marc's work more than any other subject, and not just as a wife, as a symbol of love, faith, and eternity. We can look through the evolution of Bella in Marc's work. This is the first painting Marc ever did of Bella. So you can see like she's depicted as an elegant woman, but also a little detached. Not detached from Marc, but in the sense that like it's clear he still doesn't understand her fully. There are also some symbols like the black gloves that might be a symbol of emotional distance, and a closed book. Maybe that's how Marc saw Bella at the time. This is the first painting Marc ever did of Bella. Now we go to a few years later after they are married, and you can see how it has changed. The theme of these two is flying mostly, and how when Marc is with Bella, he can detach from the day-to-day life and, fly above everything else. That's how I interpret these. And the most intimate image is the one he did in 1928, which you can see Marc is leaning into Bella's embrace, resting on her shoulders, and Bella is holding him protectively, almost like a mother. This shows that for Marc, Bella is the source of warmth, the emotional and spiritual center of his art. Here is also an etching that we actually saw in one of our trips to the Luther Brady Gallery, and you can see it's pretty sparse compared to the other paintings, but the important thing here is you can see that Bella's eyes are wide open while Marc's eyes are closed. And this actually is a quote from Bella and Marc's granddaughter, which explains that Bella Chagall always has her eyes open. She's the one who sees into the future. She really is her guide. So another representation of their relationship together. On the other hand, we have to understand why Bella was so exceptional. We can look at some of the other artists' wives, and two of them are the wives of Paul Cézanne and Henri Matisse. First starting with Hortense Viquet, wife of Paul Cézanne, and she's not mentioned in most books about Paul Cézanne. Even the ones that mention her paint a conflicting picture. She is described as talkative and impatient, which is clearly in contrast with the fact that she sat in portrait for Paul Cézanne in at least 27 portraits. They were not married and lived separately for most of their time together, and the only reason for their marriage was to legitimize their son's inheritance, which was 15. Their son was 15 at the time of their marriage. We can look at one of the portraits of Madame Cézanne. It's titled Madame Cézanne in a Red Armchair. You can see how rigid she looks, the rigid posture, the empty expression, and it shows how there is a lack of intimacy between the two. Cézanne's interest in this painting is purely structural. She's turning Hortense Fouquet into a study in form, not an actual person. Another case is the case of Amélie Matisse, Henri Matisse's wife. She also had an important role in kickstarting Henri Matisse's career. She managed household affairs, supported Henri financially, and even helped organize exhibitions. Despite this, in Portrait of Madame Matisse, you can see that she appears divided. Her face is split by a green stripe, and despite the beauty of this picture, of this painting, I should say, and the striking visuals, it's clear that they're emotionally distant. She's also an experiment, not a partner immortalized in love. If it appeared like there wasn't much about these two compared to Bella, it's because that's the way it was. There are very few actual sources that talk about these two compared to Bella, and you can only find them in like maybe in small notes on books about Henri Matisse and Paul Cézanne. So what makes Bella different? Hortense and Amélie existed as ghosts, silent presences erased from their own stories. Bella, on the other hand, was a muse who spoke. She didn't simply inspire Marc Chagall. She shaped his vision, and she also left behind her own art, her own language, and her own legacy. Through both her writing and her enduring image in Chagall's paintings, Bella transcended the boundaries that confined so many women of her time. Marc says in his autobiography that I never completed a painting without asking a yes or no from Bella. And that's how she became both the subject and the storyteller, both a muse and a creator. Her story reminds us that behind every great artwork, there may be an unseen voice, one that deserves to be heard, remembered, and celebrated. Here's the bibliography. And thank you everyone for listening. I also want to thank Professor Pollack especially. She made everything possible here.
Thank you, Arvin. That was extremely interesting. And I'm sure there'll be some interesting questions thereafter. Excellent. Okay, as we move to our next presenter, we are going to hear from Isabelle Cummings, who is a sophomore majoring in biology, and she's interested in health sciences, originally from Boston. The title of her work is Braving the Political Storm, a study of political cartoons about Hurricane Helene and Milton during the 2024 election. Again, another interesting presentation.
Yes. Oh, thank you. I just want to make sure you can see my screen and it's full screen. Okay, perfect. So hi everyone. Again, my name is Isabelle Cummings, and this is my presentation from Professor Svoboda's UW class. And again, it's titled Braving the Political Storm, and it's a study of political cartoons about Hurricanes Helene and Milton during the 2024 election. So just a quick overview of what I'm going to be talking about today. I'll be going through my introduction and previous research, my hypothesis, my data and analysis, and then some findings and conclusions that I have. So what I was asked to do was use tools and techniques from class to conduct original research on a specific instance of political messaging. And my aim was to determine if political cartoons shift from the expected response to natural disasters using moral foundations theory, social semiotics, and a cartoon cycle. So social semiotics is a tool used by artists and are often used with reoccurrence, repetition, and forcefulness to make arguments, spread information, and present opinions. And this is seen in cartoons via visual themes, which were analyzed in this research. And the moral foundations theory is a theory of psychological foundations that are used to form and act upon decisions. And many political cartoonists use this to share opinions or spread a message with their audience, framed in a specific way with those visual cues. The left-leaning political side uses what are called individualizing foundations, which are care harm, fairness cheating, and liberty oppression, while the right uses authority subversion, loyalty betrayal, and sanctity degradation, which are called binding foundations. Then this is the cartoon cycle. This was something I found on my own doing my own research, from Kelly Romano and Westgate, where the artists or the researchers, and they were doing a study after Hurricane Katrina on political cartoons, to see what the response looked like in cartoons. And they found that there was this cycle or progression that the cartoons tended to follow, which began with mourning and memorializing the disaster and those affected by it, before turning to issues of leadership, which at the time was the Bush administration, before moving to critique, blame, and contextualization on a global scale. And I wanted to use this theory as I found it really interesting during my research period of this project to combine this with the tools that I learned about in class, which all led to the development of my hypothesis, which is that political cartoons will begin by contextualizing the hurricanes and mourning the victims, and this contextualization would follow care harm foundations, regardless of the political affiliation of the artist, before shifting to finding blame for the hurricane's destruction and relief efforts, as seen in previous cartoon analyses. And to do this, I collected 65 cartoons, 33 from the left and 32 from the right, and I organized them by publication date and political lean of the artist. And from this, I found that far more cartoons were published around the time of Hurricane Milton's landfall, which was around October 10th, which I thought was very interesting as that was far closer to the presidential election in comparison to Hurricane Helene, which made landfall in late September. Then I organized them by theme, which I found which were based off of visual cues that I saw in each cartoon. And I found that any theme that occurred over 20% of the time in a cartoon was significant for this research. Themes including hurricanes, destruction, and flooding were seen around the same amount in both sides. But what was interesting was that the left and the right did have interesting cartoon or themes that were specific to their political side that didn't have as much to do with the hurricanes themselves. For example, the left had a lot of themes including climate and weather, specifically climate change, themes about or depictions of Donald Trump and misinformation and conspiracy theories, while the right had themes about FEMA, specifically towards the Biden administration at the time and the problems that they had with the relief effort, foreign issues, and depictions of Kamala Harris. Here are some examples of cartoons that I analyzed in this research from the left. This is an insight in how I categorize them with every single cartoon. I categorize them by date and then assign them moral foundations. And as you can see, a lot of them did have more than one, as I deemed more than one was applicable to the cartoon. And then here are some examples from the right. And there were some that only had one, like this one on the right here, that was only assigned care and harm. And then this was done for every cartoon and then broken down into this graph where we can see the percent of occurrences in each cartoon by each side in each moral foundation. So as you can see, the most used by far was fairness cheating by both sides, with over 50% of occurrences for fairness cheating. What was really surprising was that the right used more care harm and fairness cheating compared to the left. and the right and the left used more liberty oppression, authority subversion, loyalty betrayal, and sanctity degradation, and compared to the right. This was surprising, as stated earlier, the individualizing and binding foundations practically flipped between the two parties, excluding liberty oppression, which is still an individualizing foundation. And this led to some of my main findings, which were that many of the political figures, specifically for these cartoons, it was a lot of depictions of Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, as they were drawn with exaggerated characteristics, which are often used in political cartoons to diminish the characters being depicted, and the repetition or the repetitiveness of the use of these drawings causes negative association with the politician. And this is because these cartoonists want candidates to look unfit for presidency in this specific case. Between the left and the left used far more binding foundations as they were trying to point blame towards the right, while the right used a lot of individualizing foundations as they wanted to emphasize the disaster and those affected by it, which makes sense as many of the and many states that were affected do turn red in elections or are Republican states. But then they did use a lot of pointing blame towards the response efforts, specifically at FEMA and the Biden administration. And this could have been because they were trying to push a narrative about the other political lean. As fairness cheating was used the most in the cartoons, it can be assumed that each side felt cheated by the other in the response to this disaster. And this may have been an attempt to try to deepen the political divide before the election. So this led to my main conclusion that there was a shift from the expected, which is consistent with my hypothesis. However, the cartoons failed to follow a cartoon cycle and the moral foundations theory. As the main point of the moral foundations theory is that liberals and conservatives follow certain moral foundations in everyday life, we saw that they almost completely flipped, excluding liberty and oppression. It's unknown why this flip happened, but it can be assumed that perhaps artists were focused on pushing a narrative which is consistent with the current trends in modern day political polarization. But yeah, so thank you for listening. And then I just wanted to end by giving some tips about what I found, just for what's important about the writing process. First off, definitely use your time wisely. You have a long time to write this presentation, and what I can say with almost confidence is that you need the time to fully analyze and reflect upon what you're learning and in order to be able to articulate it in the way that you want to. Expect challenges. Like I said, that my conclusion didn't align with my hypothesis at first, and I know that can be pretty daunting and not what you want to happen with your research, but don't take that as I need to do my research all over again or I did something wrong. Try to find the reasons why that happened to your research, and be able to explain it. And then this is kind of cliche, but have fun with it. Like stated before, I'm a bio major, so this was completely out of my realm of expertise or what I'm interested in studying. But I honestly found this project so much fun and interesting to do, and it was really just a nice break from all the math and science that I had to do. So I would say just have fun because it makes writing it 100 times easier. But again, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Isabelle. Great presentation. We have a question, but I'm going to hold off until all of our presenters have a chance to present, and then we will go ahead and start have our presenters start answering some questions. Next up, we have Grace Eagleton, who is a sophomore studying journalism and mass communication, so from my department. And she's looking at deep fakes, which is definitely an interesting topic in today's AI world. Grace, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I hope everyone can hear me. I'm gonna get my screen. Can everyone see it, hopefully? You can see it? Okay, cool. So, hi everyone, my name is Grace Eagleton, and I am so excited to be here today to talk to you about my project that I did entitled Deepfakes, where I explored our concerns and curiosities surrounding this recent form of technology in the form of AI. So firstly, what are deepfakes? So deepfakes can be described as images, videos, or audio created using artificial intelligence to simulate real or non-existent people. I'm sure at least some of you, if you are on social media regularly, have seen an AI-generated video of a celebrity, political figure, or even something that your friend made as a joke. And these are what we would call a deepfake. So what got me interested in this subject matter was I've frequently seen these types of videos because I am on social media frequently. And specifically, I remember a video that was towards the early developments of the Russian invasion in Ukraine. And there was a video floating around showing Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky giving a speech telling his soldiers to lay down their arms and surrender to Russia. And when this video was posted, a lot of people recognized that there were a lot of abnormalities with his demeanor, and his accent seemed off and his physical movements were inorganic. And this is because this video was a deepfake. And this has become a current trend of deepfakes to spread false information and try to further divide the line between what we distinguish as authentic content and AI-generated media. And I actually have an example of one if you are unfamiliar of what a deepfake is. Hopefully it works.
Grace, sorry to interrupt. We can't hear it.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Thank you.
How should I fix that? Is there a way to share audio?
It should play if you were in the YouTube directly. It should actually play even though you have it on your slides. I see that it's not muted, so
Well, even with no sound, it is pretty clear to see how realistic this video does look of Anderson Cooper from CNN. I can just show you a little outline. What he's basically saying is explaining how it looks really real and 99% of people cannot tell the difference. So yeah, sorry about that little technical bit. Okay, so I eventually decided to create this research question of how can society better utilize and protect itself from artificial intelligence programs such as deepfakes, as opposed to using them as a tool for harm on social media. And my thesis in response to this was society must further develop understanding about the dangerous nature of deepfakes and must then in turn see how deepfakes can be regulated and develop positive forms of use. So today I'll be walking you through my 3 reasons of why. So first up, we have the argument that all people of all ages, ranging from grade school to adult level educations, should be exposed to learning about deepfakes. What I find to be one of the biggest dangers of deepfakes is their ability to shape public perception. So when we think about deepfakes in the context of social media, these platforms are one of the most heavily used ways to gain news. Some people use it as their primary source of news. And so allowing this kind of content to spread on these platforms erodes society's ability to identify reality and fabrication. So even though these are deep fakes, many may assume it's real and be fed this misinformation. As a result, this will lead to users being unsure of who to trust once they find out it's fake. And the harm that deepfakes can have on public opinion will decrease the amount of trust that the public has in higher leadership tremendously, as people will question everything. Therefore, we must have a more efficient system of recognizing these deepfakes online. And one of these solutions can be education. So I looked at a couple educational forums for my project, And one that really stuck out for me was a module by MIT's Center for Advanced Virtuality. And they're already addressing this challenge of educating the younger generation on artificial intelligence. So this module that I specifically looked at aims to, quote, equip students with the critical skills to better understand the threat of misinformation. So it defines misinformation in its many forms, identifies ways to spot digital manipulations, specifically in deepfakes, and shows users how AI generation tools can be used for positive purposes, which we'll get into a little bit later. So if deepfakes were approached as a more teachable subject, people would be better qualified to face misinformation and mitigate the potential risks associated with this technology. So my second reason that I had was a somewhat controversial solution to AI content in general, and that is regulation. So I dove into social media companies that are creating regulations and mandates for their own platform usage. And I did this by looking at certain studies that aim to prove that practices like disclosure or labeling when AI content is present will help people understand that it is misinformation and actually will promote high trust. And I looked at a study specifically done by Archives of Current Research International, which found that, quote, the probability of high trust is highest when both verification and labeling compliance are present, indicating that these practices together bolster public trust in traditional media's handling of digital manipulation. In addition to social media platforms taking their own initiative, when this form of technology has reached the point of endangering people's lives and their safety online, government involvement should not be weighed out of the solution. So specifically, I actually just learned about this act. It's called the Take It Down Act, which was proposed after a group of high school students were the victims of digital harassment when deepfakes of them spread around on Snapchat. This case took place in Texas and led to a need for regulation to punish the use of manipulated photos. This bill, proposed by Senator Ted Cruz, targets non-consensual intimate imagery and criminalizes its publication with up to 2 years of imprisonment and even harsher penalties for images that include minors. So the bill was signed into law as of May 19th, 2025. So as a result, with these two elements that we know, we can understand that there should be a balance between social media's platforms taking the initiative of regulating their own content and having the government have specific laws that prevent some of the very, very dangerous, harmful effects of deepfakes. So my last and final reason that I looked into is somewhat of a different perspective on deepfakes, which is seeing them in a more positive light. But I know all I have done is say how deepfakes are dangerous and need to be regulated, so I would love to explain how they can be used for good. So firstly, we have judiciary systems, and in this area, deepfakes could be used to provide a more accurate visual representation of suspects, helping to clarify the identities of those responsible for unsolved crimes. And by using this strategy, law enforcement could potentially improve the efficiency of investigations and increase the likelihood of solving cases while delivering more precise and fair outcomes in the justice system. So next we have museums, and the judiciary system idea is very theoretical. It hasn't really been used out yet, but this one is actually being used by some museums around the world. So in this area, a lot of museums are using this idea of image animation and making portraits, statues kind of come to life. So they have these, sometimes they have iPads that visitors can use and hold up and have a sculpture tell you their story, the story of the artist, their history, where it came from. And it kind of creates a more interactive experience for museums and could also attract more visitors by offering a modern twist on more traditional exhibits. So next we have education, which is similar to this. It has been workshopped before. And in this field, imagine sitting in a classroom where the teacher is discussing a historical figure, and instead of lecturing the entire time, the historical figure is present on the TV screen, speaking directly to the class and answering students' questions. This could help significantly boost engagement in classrooms and help students grasp complex subjects while also increasing accessibility to information. oops, sorry. So finally, we have e-commerce, which in this case is online shopping, where in this case, people could have digital clones of themselves through deepfake technology, having them try on clothes, and having them try on makeup with a digital reconstruction of their face. And this would really help for people who might not have accessibility to these stores. They might live in a different country, different state. They're not able to get to these stores for any reason. It just creates a very accessible and engagement boosting environment online. Yeah, so the point of this reason was to show that rather than dismissing deepfake technology outright, we should consider it as a source of innovation that with proper regulation and ethical guidelines could be harnessed for positive societal impact. So I just wanted to make a little acknowledgement that was actually my rebuttal in my paper, which is that deepfakes and AI content still technically fall under the category of freedom of speech and expressions. So a lot of people ask, why should there be any response to people using this technology at all? And this was actually a very big topic for the Take It Down Act that I described before. A lot of freedom of speech activists did not really understand, like they didn't support the act because they felt like it was taking away their rights. And my response summarized was that deepfakes without some form of supervision can lead to damaging consequences that can negatively affect many individuals, not just the ones that the deepfake is of. It is contributing to this area of misinformation and just spreading lies. So where do we go from here? So with the rise of artificial intelligence, social media has become a core platform for digitally altered misinformation to spread. And this has created an urgent need to address the challenges posed by deepfakes and mitigate their potential dangers. Because deepfakes cannot simply be erased with the click of a button, it is crucial to develop solutions that reshape how we manage the technology, rather than attempting to ban it entirely. So rather than fearing it, we must focus on understanding its impact and the possibilities for innovation that can come with it. So while the future of this technology remains uncertain, our goal as a society should be to grasp its implications, use it responsibly, and harness it for the betterment of humanity. Thank you, and a big thank you to Professor Richter.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Grace. Very interesting on a topic that we can't hear enough about. So we have about 7 minutes, being mindful of everybody's time this evening for questions to our panelists. I do have one that came through after Isabelle's from Phoebe McLean. Phoebe is asking Isabelle, what drew you to Hurricane Helene political cartoons specifically, compared to the other events that spark political cartoon art? And do you think your research can be applied for other events as well?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I chose political cartoons because I think they're just like a really like interesting form of political media. I didn't really want to do, I think they're a very kind of abstract form of media where they are completely subjective to the artist's bias and opinions. Whereas with like we had the goal of our project was to do specifically a form of political messaging. And I think that political cartoons are very subjective compared to traditional news sources where they have to try to maintain that unbiasedness, which I really liked. And I wanted to do something visual rather than just analyzing writing, which was definitely like a key component of why I picked political cartoons. And then for Hurricanes, Helene and Milton, we did a thing in class where we looked at political cartoons about the wildfires in California and how they got really political, and that really interests me in doing a natural disaster. Also, kind of being able to relate it to that biological sciences that I'm studying right now, the ecology kind of part of it and the natural, environmental, and infrastructural, I thought was interesting. And then just the hurricanes being so close to the election, it was so I think it was such like an important time that things were really, really political and things were really tense at that time. So being able to maybe see if the election had an effect on it was something I really wanted to study.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I have a few questions in here. I'm going to try to get through them all, again, being mindful of our time. The next question is from Beatrice to Grace. Beatrice is asking, you mentioned that AI deepfakes could be used for education and museums. Do you think that these could be used to ever completely replace human scholars? And what do you think could be done or should be done to protect human scholars? Grace?
Yeah, so it's an excellent question. I 100% have thought about this myself. I truly believe that deepfakes will never, ever, ever in any realm replace any form of human innovation. I think that we as humans should use it to elevate what we have already done. As I was saying, with museums, it's showcasing human development, just explaining it more to people who haven't been exposed to, let's say, like the history of the Mona Lisa, who want to learn more. It's about elevating what we as humans have done and not letting it create content for us, and using it more as a tool for innovating what we as a society in our entire existence have done, and really showcasing our successes and even our failures, of showing why certain historical events happened the way they did, what could have been different. And then what was the second part of the question? I'm so sorry.
I think you answered it. What could be done to protect human scholars?
Oh, yes. I think just definitely never letting deepfake content create ideas for us. I feel like that is the true human experience, is that we can create ideas and we create art and we create history. We can't let artificial intelligence do that for us, because then it really does start to answer the fears that many people have of artificial intelligence.
Excellent. I have another question for you, Grace, while you're up. This is from Natalie, and she's asking, what were the exhibits and what methods did you use to analyze those exhibits? And I'm going to try to get through some of our questions. We have about 3 minutes left.
Yeah, so I'll be really quick. I think a specific exhibit that I looked at was specifically at the Dali Museum. They had Salvador Dali, who is a Spanish artist. They had this huge screen of him, and they used deepfake technology to build like a digital clone of him, and he was standing at the entrance greeting guests. He would actually talk to them. And I think the way that I kind of analyzed it was like, okay, what was the purpose of this? Because obviously we want to get away from that creating human ideas. It was more of a way to celebrate the artist's work and just elevate what they had already done.
Excellent. Thank you again. And again, I'm sorry if I can't get to everybody's questions. I'm going to combine two for Isabelle. And Isabelle, if you can be brief in your answer, because we are running out of time. Amelia, Isabelle, and Una, forgive me, are asking, how did you avoid contaminating your findings with your own political ideology biases while researching the political cartoons? And Una is asking, how did you account for your bias? So they're almost similar questions. If you could explain that for us in a couple minutes.
Yeah, I think honestly, to begin, just like any analysis of anything political, by specifically one person, if I could have, I would have maybe tried to have multiple people kind of view to kind of get and analyze the cartoons the same way I did, and then see if there was overlap. I think that's probably the best way to go about it. But unfortunately, I couldn't, teach a bunch of people the moral foundations and how to assign them, and then make sure and then make them analyze all of them. But if I could like redo my research or do that analysis again or in future research, do it that way so we can limit the bias more. But what I tried to do was, or the way I tried to mitigate it was by not really, I didn't organize them by lean at first. I just put them all as I found them and then just assign them kind of what the cues I was seeing, and then what the moral foundations I could have assigned to it to try to like, so I didn't know like whose cartoon was what at first. So I didn't have that bias being like, oh, this is a like a left-leaning artist, I'm gonna assign it this way, or this is a right-leaning artist, I'm gonna assign it this way. But obviously, like no research that was done this way could have been 100% bias-free. But future studies hopefully could counteract that by having multiple people do it, or multiple from different political ideologies to try to mitigate that bias in the research.
Excellent. We are just about at time, and I do have a couple more questions, so I'm going to quickly combine them. And Grace, if you could answer them really quickly. I don't want to keep people longer than what we promised, but I have three actually for you. So Sophia's asking, how can we regulate deepfakes to help recognize if the content's real? And then Addie's adding on to that, saying, do you think it's ethical to use deepfakes for educational or judiciary purposes, being that AI often misrepresents information? And then Maggie's saying the term deepfake sounds derogatory towards AI. Does deepfakes refer to mainly AI videos? And that is our last question, unfortunately, because we are out of time. So Grace, if you can jump on in there and wrap it up.
Thank you so much for the questions. I think the first one, very important. I just think like labeling, verification comes directly from the platform that the deepfake is being like uploaded on. The second one, I would say there's always room for that. There's always room for error. It's a piece of technology, so obviously it's going to have some room for error. I think definitely that's why it's very theoretical in those areas. It's only been lightly tested in educational purposes. So I think it needs to be tested over and over again with different focus groups in different settings everywhere. Yes, you are completely right. I think in some ways it is kind of derogatory. I think it's been given that term mostly because people are very afraid of it and very afraid of the technology as it is right now. There are other ways to call it, like synthetic media. People even call them like face swapping videos for very like casual ways to describe it. And yeah, I think, sorry, what was it? This deepfakes refer mainly. Yeah, so it kind of depends on like what the content is. Typically, if it's used for malicious purposes, people tend to call it deepfakes because it is trying to spread misinformation.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of our audience members. Round of applause for our wonderful presentations for everyone. And sorry, we are out of time, so I don't want to keep anyone longer than as we promised.